Hi, this is Marco Pimentel. Welcome to the podcast, Someone Like You. In this first season, you'll discover founders, creators, entrepreneurs, and business owners who are passionate about creating business models with lasting, sustainable climate solutions. Seaweed. We see it in the sushi we eat. We see it washed up on the beach. We see it in the ocean if you live on the coast. But seaweed can be a very powerful tool to sequester carbon and be an incredible food source. We often think of trees as the key to carbon removal, but researchers have found that seaweed is in fact the most effective natural way of absorbing carbon emissions from our atmosphere. Seaweed sequesters nearly 200 million tons of CO2 every year. That's nearly as much as New York State's annual emission. As a crop, which takes us to today's episode. The company we're talking to is growing seaweed as a crop. And according to studies from the BBC, 1 hectare of a seaweed farm produces more protein than the same amount of land used for cattle. On this week's episode, I sat down with Desirée Dupuis, VP of Sales and Marketing at Cascadia Seaweed. With over 18 years of marketing experience, Desirée is passionate about living a life of purpose and making a substantial impact in the world by creating permanent, sustainable change. Cascadia Seaweed is based on Vancouver Island in the town of Sidney, BC, and is growing to become one of the largest providers of ocean cultivated seaweed, a climate-friendly crop which only requires sea and sun to grow. The company also launched Kove Ocean Foods, an in-house brand of seaweed products now available in stores and online. Not only is seaweed climate healthy, but it's rich in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, and is proven to be extremely beneficial to our health. Here is our conversation. Hi, Desirée. How are you doing?
Hey, Marco. I'm doing well. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being on the podcast and taking the time. I think we live in somewhat similar areas of BC. You're based in Vancouver?
Yeah, I'm based in downtown Vancouver, and our head office for Cascadia Seaweed and Cove is in Sidney, in a subset of Victoria on the island.
Yeah, it's a place about 15 minutes. So I one day I will have to come up to the office and say hi and see everything that you and your team are doing. But thanks again for coming on. You obviously have quite an extensive background of wanting to, make change in, your community and beyond. You founded your own life insurance company, I think, after being hit in a car accident at the age of 18. So I definitely want to know a little bit more about that. And then you were co-founder in the board of an NGO, Reuben Shoes, and now you're the VP of Sales and Marketing at Cascadia Seaweed. So I'd love to just kind of unpack that a little bit and just tell us a little bit about your journey and your motivational factor for you.
Yeah, thank you. You've done your research. I was thinking about that. I'm like, how did he know I was in a car accident? But yeah, I think, again, like being in a car accident, I was actually 19 and my best friend was 18 at the time. And it was a life-changing, life-altering car accident. And I think it just makes you at that age reevaluate, what you're doing with your life. You haven't even really begin to think about what you're doing with your life, but it really reinforces how precious life is and how limited our time on this planet can be. And so that was already set in stone for me at that point. And I think even leading up to that point, I've always been someone with a very entrepreneurial spirit, this like kind of burning desire inside of me to make the most of my life, reach my potential, do something that matters, and just, again, like make the most of the short time that we each have here individually on this planet. And then that same person that I was in the car accident with, Kelly, is my best friend from high school. And her life really changed course from that accident. Like she actually had to relearn how to walk again. And she was supposed to start at Camosun College that summer and go into nursing. And again, she was in a wheelchair for a while and walked with a cane and had to relearn how to walk again. So there was no chance that she was going to be able to go into such a physically demanding job as becoming a nurse. And so eventually she she actually got into the life insurance business because she needed something that would be, not demanding physically. And also like she couldn't just sit behind a desk for 8 hours a day. So it would be like really flexible, work when she can. And then also with insurance, it's not something people like to talk about, but it's just always there at the back of your mind, because at any point, at any time, something could happen. And insurance is there to make sure that if that bad thing that does happen to a certain number of people, if it should happen to you, you have the financial means to help you. And so that's how she kind of got into insurance. And then as I watched her with her business, knowing that I also wanted to have my own business and do something that was meaningful, again, when you see people get sick or lose their wives or their husbands and they have the financial means to like take care of themselves, even through that dire incident, insurance to me felt like a really meaningful industry and business to get involved in. And then while we were building our insurance business, Kelly had been sponsoring a boy named Ruben through World Vision, actually. And so since he was, 3 years old, she had his little picture. And for 8 years, her and I both kind of like watched him grow up through the letters that she would get. And then in 2012, when he was 10, so she started sponsoring him when he was 3. And then when he was 10, she got to go down to the Dominican and actually spend the day with this boy, with Ruben. And that was, again, like another very profound, eye-opening experience, because, we living in Canada, obviously, like, poverty exists. Maybe you've gone to Mexico or you've heard about it. But when you actually go and see the conditions that human beings, just like you, are living in, not having access to running water, not having a real floor, like the earth is their floor. And and so she learned during that day with Ruben that children around the world, if they don't have shoes, they're not allowed to attend school. And she thought that was just like ludicrous, like the people that need education the most are those living in poverty. Otherwise, how else are they ever going to change their circumstances? And so she came to me with the idea to collect some shoes to help kids go to school. And she wanted to name it Ruben Shoes. And so that's how the NGO started. And then now we sent almost 100,000 pairs of shoes around the world to help kids access education. And we now have 2 fully built massive infrastructure buildings, elementary school and a high school with 550 students. And and then obviously, like, through my work in international poverty, going to the Dominican and visiting Africa and just being in this industry, I started to learn all about the poverty that exists domestically, actually, here in Canada and even within BC. And so, reconciliation with First Nations is obviously becoming like a very conscious movement. And it was something that was becoming very important to me. Of course, like, we don't see barriers geographically, racially, or whatever. And so, one of the things that did hurt us as a charity, people would say, well, what about like the people down the road or like in our backyard? And we would be like, well, a 10-year-old boy in the Dominican feels like it's our backyard. But again, like, of course, like with Indigenous communities right here in Canada, you kind of like, that does feel a little bit more, even more pressing. And and so that became a really important mission and value for me too, is doing what I could do with my life to help that movement push that needle forward too.
Wow. Yeah, what an incredible experience. And I think you start to see that a little bit with, I've been saying this for years. I think I had mentioned before we started recording, I'm a big fisherman. And, I've as a kid, I've seen the firsthand of what climate change has done or environmental impacts have done to that industry and that sector. And I've also been saying for many, many years, until people start to experience what, potentially what climate change is or what it can do to them on a daily basis, heat, massive, heat waves and these changes, it really starts to change people's perspective, how real it is. So neat that, obviously being able to make that connection and see it firsthand, how it's changed you. So how did you end up getting involved with Cascadia Seaweed?
Yeah, and so it was just a really timely, divine, situation. It was really at the start of COVID and like spring, summer 2020. And I was in my apartment doing absolutely nothing because I had all the time in the world, because I was a full-time employee of the charity. And so my main job was fundraising and managing events. And of course, all of our events were canceled or postponed. All of my fundraising initiatives, which usually meant going for coffees or attending events, was not happening. And so I was doing a lot of meditating, doing a lot of running and focusing on my health. And I got a text one day from one of my mentors, and he says, I have an opportunity for you and it aligns with all your values. And sure enough, it was an opportunity to, Cascadia Seaweed had been in operations for about a year, building the three founders and a couple of employees building seaweed farms in partnership with First Nations communities, and realized that the highest and best value for the use of the seaweed that they're growing would be to launch a consumer food brand. And obviously needed some partners and some intelligence to help do that. And so when I started learning about Cascadia Seaweed and just the whole industry of seaweed in general, it absolutely aligned with all my values. So I stopped eating meat in 2008, and seaweed is obviously a plant that grows in the ocean. It's a plant-based vegan crop. And so that was first and foremost. And I've always been very health conscious, and seaweed is an incredibly powerful nutrient and so many, health benefits. And then of course the integration and partnership with First Nations was a huge value of mine that had becoming more important. And then my whole life has been spent in marketing and brand development. And so the company checks all my values, and the line of work, which would be, developing the tastiest, most delicious foods made from seaweed and then launching a brand that would house all those food products, it's basically was a dream job and a dream company for me to join. And so I joined that summer in July 2020 officially.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think maybe just taking a kind of a quick step back and just kind of understanding Cascadia's mission, or why they started, and then understanding Cove and understanding the goal of Cove and the product line and what that product is, and maybe just for the listeners to understand a little bit about what Cascadia does. I think people know seaweed. You eat it. It's around. You see it in sushi. It just naturally grows in the oceans. But maybe diving a little deeper into kind of what Cascadia is and Cove.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, so our original founder and chairman of the board now, Bill Collins, he was doing actually an economic study on Vancouver Island, and that's where he realized the economic opportunity and benefit of building seaweed farms and growing seaweed. And so that was kind of the original concept as to why Cascadia was founded, because it's just, as the world population grows, we need to diversify where our food comes from. The burden of climate change, we need to be taking on initiatives that will help, to impact the health of the planet positively. And then, of course, like I mentioned, the Indigenous part too, with working with First Nations. So Cascadia was founded, to build seaweed farms, to cultivate seaweed on a scalable level where we could look to it for the multiple functions that seaweed has to offer. And then, as I mentioned, realizing that even though there's a myriad of uses, possibility for seaweed, we realized at Cascadia that the highest and best value would be to develop food products made with the seaweed that we're growing, because we are the largest cultivator of seaweed in North America. So we're growing a beautiful crop in the pristine waters of British Columbia and the Pacific Ocean, whereas, most seaweed that is in the market is either harvested, so just kind of like, foraged and taken off the shore, or it's grown and cultivated in Asia, which obviously there's a significant difference than here in BC and in the Pacific Ocean. And so, so realizing that the highest and best value would be to create tasty food products, Cascadia essentially had a baby, and with my work and the mentor I referred to earlier, Carlos Zarilla, on the brand side of the company, we have launched Cove, which is Kove, and it's our consumer packaged goods food product. And so we exist to create the tastiest, most delicious food made with Cascadia seaweed, the seaweed that we're growing all over Vancouver Island in partnership with First Nations. And yeah, right now we just have our first signature seaweed seasoning, which is sea spice, but we have at least 10 other products in development that we're hoping to bring to market over the next year or two and really help Canadians include and eat more seaweed into their diets.
And so, maybe it's a simple question or a naive one, but you see seaweed in the ocean, it's just grown naturally. How do you grow it at a different scale, and how do you grow it as a crop in the ocean?
That's a great question, and one that I've actually been learning so much about every day. So seaweed, which I didn't even realize, is actually like inoculated. It's fertilized. So we actually, birth little seaweed babies in seed format, and we take those baby, like we're growing sugar kelp, so we call them like kelp babies, and the seed is actually put on twine, on spools of twine in a container, which is our nursery. So we have this, very luxurious nursery that exists in a shipping container. And that is where our spools of seaweed seedlings are kind of like nursed and spend the first part of their lives. And then once they're, at a healthy enough state, all that twine actually gets put onto rope. And then we take the twine and rope out on a boat with rocks and buoys and anchors, and the lines and ropes of these little seaweed babies are put out into the ocean, and they just stay there for 4, 5, 6 months and grow into these beautiful curtain beds of seaweed. And yeah, once it's time, we lift up the line, and again, there's just like this beautiful crop of abundant seaweed leaves, and then we just cut it off the line and take it into further processing. So it's pretty low impact, but it is a substantial process to actually cultivate and grow the seaweed at scale.
Yeah, neat. So you do it off on land, and then you do it finish it in the ocean. And you said it's about a 5 to 6 month process from not from seedling, but from once it's planted in the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. Like right now, the species that we're working with, they kind of grow in the fall, winter, so really cold, pristine temperatures. And yeah, so we usually work in the nursery around August, September, and the seedlings get planted in the ocean maybe like fall, like mid-October or so. And then right now, actually, we just had pulled our first crop out of the ocean at our farm off of James Island, in partnership with the Sayout First Nation. So yeah, it's about five or so months that those little seeds have been growing.
Yeah, very, very neat. So when we talk about seaweed, it'd be great to understand a little bit around the environmental and economic benefits of seaweed. I think we hear about it, but I guess from maybe two questions. One from the a climate perspective in terms of why growing seaweed is an important piece to our overall kind of climate strategy, but also, and then just diet. I think there's a lot of people looking to go plant-based, and they're looking at items and products that they can introduce into their daily lives. The term flexitarian is live and growing and thriving. So yeah, it'd be great to understand the two sides, diet and also when it comes to climate.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, absolutely, with regards to climate change and the health of our planet, like seaweed is arguably the most sustainable crop to grow at scale on the planet because it simply grows in the ocean. So it requires only the sea and sunlight to grow, which means that we're not bulldozing down forests. We're not clear cutting the Amazon to make room with regards to land to plant a crop as it grows in the ocean. And then second, there's no demand on fresh water because it grows in the ocean. So we're not utilizing, any additional water to help grow this crop. And then thirdly, in terms of just like environmental impact, it doesn't require any chemicals, any fertilizers to help it grow, which obviously can have a negative impact on just like the future ability of soil to continue to produce food. And so from that standpoint, it's just such low impact way to grow and produce food. So from the environmental standpoint, it is just such a superstar. And then from a health standpoint, it is also a superfood. Seaweed is rich in so many vital nutrients. One of them being, and on the forefront of most people's minds and the conversation nowadays, has been protein. And one of the things that people don't really need to worry about with regards to flexitarian or plant-based diet is protein, because we get protein from so many different sources. But seaweed absolutely contains a great source of protein, anywhere from about 12% up to 25% protein in certain species. So you're getting a very good source of protein within seaweed. And then other benefits, one of the main benefits, because it's so rich in this element, is iodine. And iodine is vital for thyroid function, which is regulates your metabolism. And there are many people that have issues with their thyroid and need to manage their iodine. And so seaweed is an absolutely great source, excellent source of iodine. And then there's been lots of studies and scientific stats that prove that eating seaweed is beneficial for your gut, with lots of fiber and in terms of digestion. It's also great for cardiovascular, heart health, and can support brain function as well with some different omegas and fats. So it's a superstar. It's a plant, and most of us know that green plants are usually by default full of great nutrients. So seaweed is no different, that's for sure.
Every week on Someone Like You, we dive into stimulating conversations with founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, and the likes who are consciously and successfully creating sustainable business solutions for the long haul. Tune in every week for a new inspiring conversation on leading climate solutions, and if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it. And also, subscribe to the platform of your choice and give us a rating and a review. It'd be much appreciated. And when it comes to growing seaweed as a crop, is it affecting any of the natural habitat at all? Where it is grown. Obviously, if you're doing it at scale, yes, it's grown in the ocean, it's grown in sunlight. It doesn't need any chemicals to grow. But is there any impact to the area, to the ecosystem, or is it typically a net benefit? Just understanding that piece.
Yeah, it's from what we've seen so far, it's absolutely a net benefit to the ecosystem. It provides, again, like obviously when humans eat it, it gives you all these rich vitamins and nutrients, but it also provides that to the ocean life and the ecosystem surrounding that. So in some of our farms, like we're still too young to really have, documented data over a significant period of time. But even just visually, when we've gone to visit some of our farms, it's vibrant with fish and underwater activity, and the birds are flying overhead, and there's salmon and there's bears nearby, and you see this like really rich ecosystem that's happening that we were told was not actually in fact the case a year or two or three prior to having this seaweed farm, so to speak, there. And so we've been seeing the positive results. I think we have a long way to go before we would ever start to see, like the negative impact. I think we would have to infiltrate our oceans with like every kilometer of seaweed for it to kind of like take over and have a negative impact. But as long as we manage it, and like anything, you have to do it, in moderation and in balance. But from what we can see, it just only improves the ecosystems in the ocean, helps to buffer against acidification, actually. So it helps to deacidify the ocean, making it healthier for ocean life and sea creatures, even the planet. So there's a lot of research happening around carbon sequestration and how much seaweed can actually remove carbon from the atmosphere and nitrogen as well. So the environmental impact seems to be definitely a net positive, and we're only on the cusp of really understanding the power that seaweed has to offer for the planet and certainly for the oceans.
Yeah. And from my firsthand experience, I've experienced the same thing, not on a crop level, but just, you see any seaweed, large areas of seaweeds, be it out fishing or out exploring in the ocean, it's nothing but, an increase in sea life, both when you're scuba diving or snorkeling or when you're fishing. It's just seaweed is nothing but what I've seen a benefit to the ocean, and obviously probably similar case. Has that conversation of carbon, removal come up from maybe not from a Cove perspective because it's, building a food brand, but from a Cascadia perspective, just around the opportunity around that in conjunction with food ingredient?
Oh, absolutely. And yes, it's a focus of Cascadia, but it does impact Cove because one of the pillars of our brand is climate, and so a lot of people, I think, humans as consumers are really thinking about like how what they eat impacts the climate, in terms of like animal agriculture and different things like that. And so carbon is a huge part of that. So it absolutely is of consideration for Cove. But yes, for Cascadia, absolutely, we have people on our team doing this research. In fact, just this morning on our weekly stand up with the team, one of our key scientists just came back from an Oceans 2050 conference in Spain, in Granada, where the whole focus is on quantifying carbon sequestration via seaweed. And so it is definitely at the forefront of our work and trying to figure out how that fits into the work that we're doing.
Yeah. So Cove stands for knowledge, oneness, vitality, and excellence. So can you just maybe talk a little bit about that and how I love the branding aspect and the marketing aspect of brand. So just understanding a little bit more about how that came to be and why that was created.
Yeah, of course. Well, because, like each of those letters as a part of the acronym really stands for something that is at the core of our brand and what we believe in. And so knowledge, of course, it's um, at Cascadia, we're trailblazing a whole new industry and sector. And at the base of that is really knowledge of what seaweed as a crop has to offer, all the things that we just discussed. And so we are positioning ourselves as becoming experts in the industry of seaweed. And so knowledge is, obviously a huge part of that. And again, being kind of like knowledge leaders in the seaweed industry. We're about to host our second annual Seaweed Days. So we are, again, at the forefront of leading this industry and educating people on the benefits of seaweed and always like increasing our own knowledge. As I mentioned, one of our team members was just at a conference in Spain. And so, yeah, knowledge is a very key component. Also, relying again with work with our First Nations Indigenous partners, like they've been eating and growing and cultivating seaweed for eons of time, right? And so it's kind of like also like relying on the knowledge that already exists within ancient cultures in regards to like food that's been around for millennia. So knowledge is absolutely a key component. Oneness, I mean, we've been talking about climate change. I think, it's that key thought about karma and like the thing that we're like every action we take as a human being affects our planet and it ultimately affects our own livelihood. And so, being one with the planet and having that incorporation is truly important, and that's what Cove is like trying to communicate and be. And then vitality speaks to like the human component, the health component, right? Like in order to be our best, we really have to feed our bodies the most nutritious fuel. And I think over time, with technology and processing and manufacturing, we've just really gone away from real food and food that is actually rich in vitamins and is natural and organic and everything like that. And so eating a superfood like seaweed only helps to improve our own vitality. And of course, there's a little parlay under there, which is the vitality of the planet. Um, and then, of course, excellence, which is a core value of Cascadia, is really everything that we do. We just do it to the best of our ability, and excellence is at the forefront of that. So we have no desire to just be a mediocre company growing a little bit of seaweed and maybe selling a few products here and there. We really want to we want to have excellence sewn into everything that we do, and so that's why we wanted to include that value as well as a part of our brand.
So Cascadia it started as a food producer, like an ingredients producer, and creating Cove to sell its own ingredients. Why did it make that decision to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, just realizing that the highest and best value, like rather than us just selling seaweed as a commodity, it would be for us to actually take on the R&D and the innovation of creating our own brand of food products ourselves and managing our supply and really building the equity that a brand, the type of equity that you can build within a brand. And so, yeah, that was a key decision that was made. And that's when three of us, as I mentioned, myself, my mentor, Carlos Rillo, and then our financial director, CFO, Rob Napoli, joined in the summer of 2020 to really bring the vision of the brand to life.
Yeah, I love it because I see, you see other brands and, let's just Beyond Meat as a good example where, they had to create something new and unique, but they also had to create the market. And that market then drove that demand. And when you think about seaweed, who's doing that, right? It's an ingredient that you see in very selective ways, but what's the brand that's trailblazing so that people realize that we need more seaweed, we need to eat more seaweed, we need to grow more seaweed, the entire benefit of it. So no, I love that way of doing that. How do you suggest, obviously your suggestion is your product, but how do you suggest people start using seaweed and Cove's products in their daily or weekly life?
Yeah, well, that's another reason why our brand exists, is because we want to also make seaweed accessible. So our very first product is the furikake style seasoning spice, which can literally be used all throughout the day. People are eating it on eggs, whether they're plant-based eggs or regular eggs, and avocado toast is a game changer. Definitely in the evening if you're snacking on popcorn, in salads, just with a salad dressing, like an olive oil with our sea spice. So there's so many ways that people can now incorporate our seaweed seasoning into their daily life, and through that, just as like a starting point, it makes it really accessible to start just kind of like warming up your palate to seaweed, because it does have, a very specific taste if you're trying to just eat just kind of like seaweed out of the ocean, which is again why we're making it into delicious food products to start to get the North American palate ready to eat and enjoy seaweed. And then with sea spice, it brings so much flavor and taste without having to add like any additional salt. There's it kind of works as a natural organic MSG. So you have this flavor enhancer that has all the benefits of seaweed as well. And then with our other products coming to market, like tortilla chips and a healthy protein puff, and eventually some like of our own burgers and things like that, we will have 7 days of seaweed available for people to enjoy. Other than that, I mean, you can definitely buy like smaller scale, like more organic items like kelp noodles, or obviously another very popular item is the roasted seaweed snack sheets that many families have because kids love them. And so just starting with those, there's like really fun recipes with the seaweed snacks. You can make your own sushi, you can use it as like a wrap yourself, you can put it in your ramen. Yeah, and I think with Cove, it will be the best way for people to start to really enjoy seaweed on a higher level than having to be a home cook and figuring out different ways that you can use like real seaweed into your food products, because it is not the easiest thing to do per se.
Yeah. And from from a processing perspective, to turn it into these products, is it an easy ingredient to use?
I mean, it's relatively easy to use. It's just actually having the capacity and the infrastructure available. So nobody is processing seaweed that we found, especially in BC, at scale. And so it takes seaweed most likely has to be blanched, so given like a hot water bath to help remove some of those heavy metals that are too much, and even for like a cleaning processing step. And then it needs to be dried, and because there's so much moisture in the seaweed, we need like large access to large equipment, machinery for the dehydration, for the removing of all the moisture. And then our products right now are using either a powder or a flake, and so then there's the additional step of pulverizing it into either the flake or the powder. And again, like finding a facility that has all of this processing set up within itself, we have not been able to find. So now we are not only building seaweed farms, we're actually like building infrastructure and facilities to then process seaweed and dry it into the format that we need. And then obviously going on and finding some manufacturers to help with the manufacturing of the actual end products, food products.
Yeah. So thinking, you brought up scale. I think it's by 2025, Cascadia plans to have about 500 hectares, which is, I think, about 1,000 football fields under cultivation. I think with agreements for like another 500 more. So how does Cascadia Seaweed plan to reach these goals?
Yeah, it's all through our work with First Nations. We only do what we do by partnering with different First Nations communities, and we're in conversations every day with different bands and different potential partners. And so licensing, working on licenses with our First Nations communities. I mean, they are stewards of the coastal waters. And so, like I said about knowledge, like we rely on them for the knowledge, but we also rely on them for that partnership and access to their land and into the water. And so, yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot, but when you think of, the scope of the ocean, there's 3 million square kilometers in Canada alone of ocean water, and about 1 million of that which can actually be used for farms and for processing. So yeah, it's just over the next 3 years, over time, developing and those relationships and building out the farms with our First Nations partners.
Does it have to be fairly close to in title for the farms to grow? Obviously, the closer to docks and facilities, the
Yeah,
better.
exactly.
But is it pretty limitless in terms of location?
Pretty limitless, of course, with all like the different coves and bays and areas that we can go.
Yeah.
And yes, absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't just with regards to like Mother Nature, like we couldn't just have it like in the open sea, right? Like it needs to be like the infrastructure needs to be anchored, to stay in position. In fact, that was one of the reasons why we kind of started harvesting a little bit early was because our farm was starting to move around and get displaced. And so that's one of like the key components in building it out. And so yeah, you wouldn't just be able to go like miles out in the ocean and drop seaweed farms
Yeah.
without the proper investment in it.
Of course. So you mentioned partnering with First Nations for the land or for the access to the oceans to do this. Has this been, has a discussion just around, obviously, this is very specific to BC and the contention with open net fish farms and a lot of those being closed down. Does this look to replace a lot of those opportunities, a lot of the jobs? Like, how has that discussion come up at all?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely part of the conversation, and certainly we hope to help fill that kind of gap or that void, because a lot of, again, like the knowledge and experience is there. And so if we can again, kind of like have a solution with something that is more environmentally friendly, eco-conscious industry, then yeah, hopefully we can help to resolve some of that, provide economic opportunities, employment, jobs. Absolutely, that like seaweed farming can help with that.
Yeah. And so obviously Cove's doing something differently. It's kind of trailblazing in terms of this idea around how the seaweed can be used. What have been the most, what are the, I guess, the opportunities and the challenges that you've faced with obviously doing things differently? Objections to eating seaweed, to how to use the product, to education. Just understanding how that's how you've gone about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is just being the first ones, really. Like I said, like in North America, the first company really at this scale that's vertically integrated with regards to building farms, cultivating seaweed, and then turning it all the way into our own brand of food products. And so everything along that way, like even just like building the infrastructure of a seaweed farm to like, how do we get it out of the ocean? How do we keep the integrity of the product while we transfer it into food? And like I said, all of the whole process of, washing, blanching, drying, dehydrating, powderizing, pulverizing into a flake. Like there isn't like a turnkey place where you can just go and be like, okay, here we have, a ton of fresh seaweed. Now help us turn it into tasty food products. And so we're doing that. Like we have to figure that out. And, we've had to go to fruit dryers in the Fraser Valley in Chilliwack to take seaweed between apples and cherry season and dry some seaweed for us to help get it into certain food products while we're trying to set up our own processing facilities. And so it's just, it's being the first in a new industry where there's so much education, there's so much learning, there's so much infrastructure that's needed, which obviously also like equals a lot of financial resources needed as well to make this happen. So that's challenging, of course. And yeah.
And on that topic, how has Cascadia and Cove been funded? Has it been through traditional, through venture? Has it been through different grants or?
Yeah, a mix of both. So it definitely started with, a lot of venture capital, a lot of private equity, but at the same time, a lot of non-dilutive funding, government grants for different specific projects like salmon restoration, like you asked earlier about, how does seaweed affect the natural ecosystem? And so we actually have some grant funding to research that in terms of like salmon restoration and some other funding on whether or not the impact that seaweed can have in regards to animal feed for cattle and agriculture, because there's a lot of studies that have shown by adding seaweed into feed, we can dramatically, potentially up to 90% decrease in greenhouse gases that are emitted, from the burps and farts of cows just by integrating seaweed into their diet. And so, we've gotten some government funding for that kind of research. So it's a mix of both. Of course, it's always, more interesting or, better to get the non-dilutive type of funding. So that the equity that we build over time is better for all of our investors. But yeah, we've been consistently raising money over the last 3 years and raised quite a significant amount of money to complete the work that we're doing.
Has it been publicly provided, that number, that the funding so far for Cascadia in general?
I don't know if it's public because we're a private company, but of course, if anyone's interested in investment, our CFO and one of our partners, Rob Napoli, and our CEO, Mike Williamson, would absolutely engage in any conversation. It's definitely in the 7 figures. I can say that, of the amount of money that we've raised and have been allocated through grants, and always continuing to grow. Yeah.
Well, and that's the difficulty too around some of these businesses that are focusing on the two sides of you have a climate initiative that's likely a positive to the food product side of it, and then it's not a traditional venture company when it comes to in a lot of sense, but where you need the infrastructure, you need the plants, you need the equipment. And so looking to different sources of funding to being able to get the non-dilutive funding for these type of things, because if you're trying to do some sort of larger round of funding and it's for a $5 million facility, you typically will want to get some sort of non-dilutive option for those type of things. So it's interesting to understand how you are able to scale these type of businesses, especially on the two sides. So does Cascadia look to create ingredients for any other suppliers outside of Cove, or is it all towards Cove?
Potentially down the road, but right now, because we do have limited supply so far with the amount of, like, we're just in our second commercial harvest, so the amount of seaweed that we have, we're expecting our brand to use up all of it. But eventually, when we get to the point where possibly, like 1,000 hectares of seaweed farms, then maybe we'll be at the point where we can, or we create other verticals for the use of our seaweed as well. Seaweed is obviously great in beauty products and even with like pet food and other things like that. So, but yeah, we want to be inclusive. We are obviously like trailblazing an entire industry. And so trying to raise the waters for all ships and boats.
Where can we find Cove products?
Great question. On the island right now, we are in Red Barn and Lifestyle Markets, and we should be in Country Grocer soon. We're at some small like retail outlets in Sidney. There's like a Seawards souvenir shop. We're at the Shaw Center for the Salish Sea. We're at in Broadmead Village at Penna Kitchen, and just recently added Peppers in Cadboro Bay, another retail store. So we're popping up more and more. And then, of course, if you can't get to any of those locations, at Kove Ocean with a K, we are selling our seaweed spice and free shipping if you order 3 or more bottles. So you can get your hands on it there.
Awesome. So I'm a huge fan of the book The Lorax. I know it's a Dr. Seuss kids book, but I give it out often to people as a gift, and I love reading it to my 2 boys. But ultimately, it's just a story about our overuse of resources and how a child with a seed can change the outcome. So a lot of people ask, what can they do? What people or businesses can do to take that kind of first step. I love to just know what you think people can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing starts in like your mind. I love that. We experienced that with Reuben Shoes, like we didn't think that we would be building schools and sending containers of used goods to third world developing countries, but it started with one small idea to get one pair of shoes to one child in need, and it has spread to, that hundreds of thousands of kids. So with regards to climate and like, a boy with a seed, I think it's, again, like in your mind, it's like making a commitment and believing that you actually can, because ultimately the only thing that ever does create change is one idea, or it starts with one person. And I think that, a movement starts again with one person with one idea and the power of the ripple effect, and something that can grow exponentially just from like that one tiny little thing. And I think, again, that's one of our mission at Cove, is to really empower people on an individual level to know and believe that the choices that they make every single day really add up and can really impact the world at scale. And it reminds me of a quote from Margaret Mead, which is, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And yeah, I think that people are so easy to say like, oh, I'm just one person, like, what can I do? But when you multiply that by 7 billion individual minds and habits, it's life or death for the planet and for ourselves. So yeah, I think absolutely people need to believe that their decisions and their choices matter.
Well, Desirée, I think that's a great place to finish up here. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you. I am very excited to follow Cove and Cascadia over the next few years as you build those thousands of football fields full of seaweed. The idea that, seaweed is such a natural product that just grows, how you're partnering with First Nations to the product side of things, how people are going towards plant-based. It's just something that I think everybody should really learn about and research, and then how you might be impactful in terms of, carbon removal and sequestration. It's such an incredible opportunity, and I'm excited and really to follow the work that you and your team are doing. So congratulations so far, and thank you very much for joining me on the show today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for providing a platform for us to share our story and to help educate people about all the benefits of seaweed and what we're up to at Cascadia, and to look out for Cove at their favorite market, and eventually more and more products coming soon. Thank you so much.
This podcast is co-produced with The Brand is Female. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Someone Like You. And if you did, please share this. We're a new podcast, and I would love it if you could share it with a family member, friend, colleague, work colleague. Share it on Slack, whoever you do. Just share and spread the message of these incredible brands. Please also support these type of companies. They're doing the hard thing, and the hard thing often takes a lot of people to get on board. And don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and review. I'm Marco Pimentel. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on Someone Like You, you can find us on Instagram at Someone Like You Podcast with all the links to the podcast, our website, and more information about the brands that we feature. Thank you again.